And welcome to everybody. And all those who are going to watch and listen to this later, you're very welcome. We are going to Central Europe in October as part of our CRT Jewish travel tours, and delighted to take a second trip with many of you. We did 2 years ago, we did a lovely trip in England, and we focused a lot on Judaism and Jewry in the city of Oxford and around about. And we looked from medieval times all the way through modern times. And we'll have that same opportunity this time round as well. Tonight, what I propose to do is begin by talking a little bit about the Jews in the Czech Republic, in this area of the world in Central Europe, where they came from, what they were doing there, what happened to them over the centuries. And after we've done a little bit of that, I will talk about the trip and what we're going to do when we get there. I'm not giving you a schedule this time. Things are still fluid. We're arranging things each day, so things are still being put in place. There are a couple of options I want to ask you about at the end for those people who are coming. We are talking about a landlocked country that is in Central Europe. The country has changed its names a number of times, so it's difficult to know what to call it. We'll call it the Czech Republic when we use the name of the country. Prague is the capital of the Czech Republic, and the Czech Republic is made up of three distinct areas, not all of which have been together for all of its history. So you'll see here on the map that Prague sits here in the western part of the country, and it's surrounded by two districts. One's called Moravia, one's called Bohemia. Bohemia, obviously very famous. And the third one is called Slovakia. Today, Slovakia is a separate, oops, we're going too fast here. Today, Slovakia is a separate country. So the Czech Republic now has a border between Bohemia, Moravia, and a third part, Slovakia. What we can see quite clearly is that Moravia and Bohemia were always influenced by the countries around them, Germany, Austria, and Poland, whereas Slovakia was much more influenced by Hungary, Russia, and Eastern Poland. So, if you like, Prague has always sat within Europe, within Central Europe. It's been a center of
Ukraine.
the European culture, and for a long time was very much connected, particularly to Vienna, through the Habsburg, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Habsburg family, which ruled it for centuries. And Vienna was the capital of the empire, and Prague was the second city. So we see here that there's tension already in this country, the tension between the West and the East, between the central headquarters of the Habsburg Empire in Vienna and Prague as the second city. We also see Bohemia and Moravia as separate districts, although quite united. And up here in the north, and I want to show you while we've got the map in front of us, is a tiny little fortress town. It was a town built as a fortress between the Prussian Empire, Germany, and Moravia, and it's called Terezin. It was named after Maria Theresa, who was the empress of the Czech Republic at the time, and Maria Theresa gave the name to this fortress town called Terezin. Terezin becomes important in the Jewish story later on. It's not that far. It's about an hour away from Prague by bus, which we will be going to.
Oh, wow.
Most of our time will be in Prague, but we will be taking this route to Terezin, and along the way we will see some of the rural synagogues and rural Jewish communities that were part of Moravia, and that will allow us to get a sense of what was happening outside of Prague when we're not dealing with Prague itself. So the city of Prague itself, as you probably know, and just put up your hand if you've been there. So I would say maybe a third of us have been there. Um, it has a river flowing right through the middle, as many of these European cities do. This is the Vltava River, and it is crossed by a very famous bridge, the Charles Bridge, which was named after Charles IV, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, and built in the 14th century. So this bridge has existed that long. On the west side of the Vltava River, you have the castle and various cathedrals and churches. On the east side of the river, we have the central square, Stare Mesto, and we will be staying right near the central square in the Radisson Hotel. Walking districts from the very center of Prague, which has a huge plaza with the Old Town Hall, very famous clock, which has Hebrew letters on it. And we will also be spending a lot of time in this area up here called Josefov. Josefov was the old Jewish ghetto. And here is where many of the synagogues, the medieval synagogues of Prague, are located. The synagogues in this quarter are not used as synagogues regularly. They are rather part of the Jewish Museum of Prague. So the medieval synagogues, although they are synagogues and are used periodically from time to time, they are owned by the Jewish Museum of Prague, and they are usually part of the museum tour, which we will be taking to see the synagogues and the different types of synagogues there are. The reason why this neighborhood is called Josefov is because, as we'll hear a little later on, when Jews were finally emancipated, they were emancipated by the Emperor Joseph, and the Emperor Joseph gave his name to the old Jewish quarter because he was the one responsible for emancipating the Jews, and they called the area Josefov, basically the neighborhood connected to the Emperor Joseph. And up here will be some of the famous synagogues we'll talk about later on. Over here to the right is the train station, which is where most of us will be arriving. We will be flying into Vienna, but we will then take train from Vienna to Prague, and we will arrive in Prague actually on the morning of Sukkot, the festival of Sukkot. We'll be arriving on that morning. I'm afraid we'll be too late for the morning service, but we will arrive and go straight to our hotel where we will unpack. And then if our rooms are not available, and as you know, by and large, rooms are not available till the early afternoon, although we are seeing what we can do about that, we will store our luggage in the hotel and we will be immediately taken on a walk of the highlights and the sights of the city of Prague in the afternoon, with dinner in the evening. So that first day may be a little tiring, but we'll keep it light. We'll make sure everyone gets enough rest, gets their luggage stored, gets their room as soon as possible, and gets to bed early that night. So we will certainly be doing that on the first day. Let me give you a little rundown of the Jews in this part of the world. It's very, very long and complex. They've been there for a very long time. So this is just a summary. I'm going to recommend some readings at the end of our time today. So if you want to read more about the details, you certainly can. Basically, Jews came to this region of the world around the year 1000. This was a time when Jews were moving up from Southern Europe, having been in Italy for a very long time since the destruction of the temple and their expulsion from the Holy Lands. They came northwards across the Alps into the Northern Europe areas. So it's the beginning of settlement in all of the famous towns that we know, Frankfurt, Berlin, Vienna, Prague. They all start to get settled by Jews around this time. It's a difficult time to be Jewish because it's the time of the Crusades, and there are these crusaders rampaging across Europe. They're crossing Europe from west to east to go towards the Holy Land in order to um, release Jerusalem from the Saracen. And tragically and unfortunately, along the way, they are massacring Jews as they go. And so it is not long before the fact that although the Jews have settled in Prague on the left-hand side of the river, the place where the castle is, taking protection from the king, that the Crusaders come marauding through that area and the Jewish quarter is burned, people are massacred, and the Crusaders go on their way, trying to fight the infidel, saying basically along the way, why should we wait till we get to the Holy Land? We might as well kill the infidel while we can, and the Jews are their victims. So that is unfortunate, but it doesn't kill off the community. And by 1270, the Jewish community have recovered enough to build the most famous synagogue in Europe. It's called the Alt Neu Shul, Alt Neu meaning old new. The reason I think that is called that name is because it's replacing a synagogue that had been there before, and it's considered new, and it's still called that, even though it's now almost 1,000 years old. It's the oldest existing synagogue in Europe, and we will be going there and seeing it. It's a wonderful building. Architecturally, it was built by the same architect who rebuilt Prague at that time, so a famous court architect, and it has survived to this day, so built pretty well. As I said before, and all of the shuls I'll mention, they're not used as synagogues anymore because they're part of the Jewish Museum. We have some famous rabbis who lived around this time. Rabbi Isaac ben Moses writes a very famous book called Or Zarua, which means the dispersed light, meaning that the Jewish people are a light to the nations, dispersed amongst the nations, and have a role to play in being a blessing to all peoples. The idea that Jews in this part of the world felt very strongly they were very connected to the cultures in which they existed. They didn't regard themselves as separate from the peoples they were living amongst. And even though there was a ghetto, a Jewish quarter, it wasn't a ghetto that had gates that were locked, like the ghetto in Venice or other places, but rather it was a Jewish quarter where Jews could live together, could find their shops, their kosher bakeries, kosher butcheries, but it wasn't a restricted place until a little later on when restrictions did come in to force. So the Jews were doing pretty well. They were offering a lot to the city. They were merchants, they were in textiles, and they were also, of course, had connections across Europe, particularly Western Europe, Frankfurt, Hamburg, Paris, Amsterdam, where they could provide trade across national borders. And this was very helpful for local uh, aristocracy, the nobles, the bishops, who liked having, quote unquote, their Jews working for them. If you came on our trip to England, we would have talked about the fact that the Jews were owned by the king. This was both a good thing and a bad thing, and the same was in Czech lands. The same idea. The king owned the Jews. On the one hand, that was a good thing. It meant the Jews were protected. Whenever there were marauders or mobs who came for the Jews, the king would protect them. On the other hand, it was a bad thing when the king himself turned against the Jews, and then they had no recourse to anything else. We come to a time in the 13th century when now the Jews are living under many restrictions across Europe. This was a time when the Lateran Council of the Vatican had decreed that Jews should wear a Jewish badge, usually a yellow badge. It could be a star. It could also be tablets of the law that they were wearing on their tunics. So restrictive dress. They weren't allowed to engage in trade, in certain trade, and certainly not allowed to join the local guild for any kind of artisan work. They became forced to become money lenders and tax collectors. And this was all, of course, very degrading and very dispiriting time for Jews as they were living in this Jewish quarter and unprotected in many ways. Um, they were subject to expulsion from time to time when they would be driven out of Prague, maybe for a year, maybe for 2 years. Then they were allowed back in again, and then a new ruler would come and expel them again. It was a very unsettling time, lot of killings and deaths at the time. We do have records of that time from the Jewish writers who kept diaries and accounts of this rather difficult and anxious time to be Jewish in Europe. Thankfully, that time eases because of the probably because of the easing of the authority of the church, and we've come to what becomes the golden age of the Jews in Prague. And this is the age which I love to share because it's really exciting for Jewish the flourishing of Jewish life. Not only, again, do Jews feel very connected to their Czech neighbors, but they are beginning to make contributions again to their town, to their city, to their lands by offering all kinds of industry, astronomy, all kinds of professions, medicine, law. And as we know, Europe was beginning to emerge from the Dark Ages and needed Jews and others of other faiths and cultures to really bring early modern Europe into the age of emancipation, which it does later on. We have the creation of the Pincus Synagogue. I'm going to show you a picture later on of the Pincus Synagogue, which is another beautiful synagogue. The most famous rabbi of this period is Rabbi Judah Loew. Rabbi Judah Loew is a Talmudist. He's a scholar of Jewish law, but he's also a Kabbalist, meaning he is a mystic. He is also involved with the city. He is involved with the running of the city, and we will see a statue of him at the town hall in Prague commemorating his contribution to the city of Prague. And I'll tell you more about him as well in a minute. He has a wonderful side story that everybody knows about, we'll talk about. We have other famous people who were Jewish, who were involved in all of these wonderful new professions: mathematics, calculus, astronomy, economics. Certainly a wonderful time to contribute to Jewish life. And of course, because of that, the Jewish community flourishes. It's a very small community at the beginning, around 600 Jewish households, and it moves gradually over 100 years to 6,000 Jews, becoming the largest Jewish community in Central Europe. So now we've overtaken Vienna and Hamburg and Frankfurt and Paris and London. And that makes this city, Prague, the most prominent Jewish city in Europe, and everybody's flooding and trying to get there. That doesn't last, but for a brief moment, Prague becomes the most important Jewish city in Europe. Now, if we were in London or in Paris, this would be an onward emancipation movement towards Haskalah, towards enlightenment. Western Europe was moving towards Jews becoming free citizens of the land, as we've seen, in the French Revolution. Certainly, that's the world in which America exists in the 1700s, and the same in Britain. However, and this is where the tension lies, Prague stands, as we said, at the nexus of Western and Eastern Europe, and therefore it's pulled towards the East, pulled towards a demagoguery of Christianity in the 1700s that actually reduces the emancipation of the Jews. And so we get another wave of anti-Jewish feeling coming again from what's called the Counter-Reformation from the church. And the church now begins again to do what it was doing in the early Middle Ages, which is to massacre, pogrom, expulsion, restricting Jewish life in all kinds of ways. And it's a sad and very tragic situation for the Jews in Prague, who have felt themselves so much part of Western European life that they fully expected that the liberties they had gained would develop and carry on and be upgraded, and they weren't. And this was such a shame. Maria Theresa, who we talked about earlier, becomes the empress, and she is a rabid anti-Jew, anti-Semite, and a strong Christian, following the teachings of the church. And unfortunately, during this period, we get this terrible situation. It also results in actually the destruction of a lot of buildings, a lot of the old synagogues, the Jewish quarter, Jewish homes are destroyed, Jewish businesses. Um, Thankfully, and without particular reason, it is felt that the Jewish quarter has historic value, particularly something like the Old Neue Schule, and therefore Maria Theresa cannot, or the people in charge do not feel they can destroy those historic buildings. And so we have a legacy of buildings that go beyond this period, although much was lost as well. Finally, in this period, into the early modern period, thankfully, we get the son of Maria Theresa, who's completely the opposite of his mother, Joseph II. As we've just talked about, Josefov is the name of the area he names in protecting the Jewish community. And in the 1750s, he produces what's called the Tolerance Patent. This is an edict of tolerance. And this is the beginning of the journey towards enlightenment, when Jews are now considered to be full and free citizens of the empire, and they get emancipation, meaning that they can get into the universities, they can be part of the professions, they can live outside the ghetto, they can build homes and businesses and trades, which is what they do. However, it does come with a price. And the price is one of assimilation. That is, they are expected to take on Western dress, German names or Czech names. We're going to talk about German and Czech language in a minute. They are expected to be, fully members of the empire, and to follow in the footsteps of the country as a whole. So gradually, of course, that assimilation leads to secularization, to intermarriage, and to the dwindling of the Jewish community. Ironically, at the moment when they become free, they lose their commitment to Jewish life. We will come back to that story in a minute. Just some of the things we're going to see when we get to Prague. This, of course, is the famous cemetery in Prague. Because there was a restriction on the amount of land that Jews could use for a cemetery, the cemetery was built layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. So the stones over the years have basically got built on top of each other, toppled in, and then more were built on top. It's a scene perhaps very familiar to many of you, because it's used as the set in The Fiddler on the Roof, when Tevye has a dream and dreams about his aunt, great aunt, I'm trying to remember her name, comes up from the cemetery, and makes a whole story about why his daughter should be married. Um, so the scene from Fiddler on the Roof is based on the Prague cemetery, and of course, people like Rabbi Judah Low are buried there, and other famous um, Czech rabbis and members of the community. More pictures of the of the cemetery. It's actually quite, in and of itself, it's quite a feature, and fascinating to walk around and to see how old these tombstones are. This is the statue of Rabbi Judah Low. He's called the Maharal. Maharal is a Hebrew word, which is an acronym for his title, Maharan Harav Yehuda Low. Maharal is the word that's used to identify him in rabbinic literature, although many people in Prague would know him as the Maharal. He lived from 1512 to 1609. As I said, he was very influential in the city, and this statue was put up in the town hall. So this statue is there in the town hall. And why is he so famous? Because for people in Prague, he is known particularly for the invention of a man built from dust called the golem. The golem is a Hebrew word that means invented person, someone who has been created out of dust, not by God, but by another human being. The golem is an ancient idea. It comes from the Talmud, but Rabbi Judah Low is said to be the only person who ever succeeded in actually making a golem. Um, the legend of the golem is, does anyone know the legend? Put up your hand if you've heard the legend of the golem. Okay, so the legend of the golem is that the Jewish community were being threatened, and Rabbi Low needed someone to protect them. And in order to find someone to protect them, he decided to use his Kabbalistic mystical magic, and he created out of dust a man, a clay man. And that clay man, he inscribed on the forehead the words Emet, 3 letters, Aleph, Mem, Taf, which means true or truth. That gave the golem the breath of life, and he became alive. The golem was huge. He was 7 feet tall, and he was someone that could protect the Jewish quarter from anybody who was coming into it. The golem was given a kindly soul, and he fell in love with the daughter of the rabbi. And the rabbi would make sure that on the Sabbath, the golem would not be operating, so that he would be put to sleep on every Shabbat. However, the rabbi forgot to turn him off one Shabbat, and he rampaged through the streets doing violence, looking for the rabbi's daughter. And Rabbi Low realized that he could no longer keep this golem alive, and he erased one of the letters from the Aleph from the head of the golem, which left 2 letters, Mem Taf. That means death in Hebrew, and the golem died. That's the legend, the story of the golem. You will know that that story was later used in various forms of literature, including the story of Frankenstein, which is we're not entirely sure that the author of Frankenstein knew the story of the golem, but it's a common theme in European magic and legends of the creation of a clay man who then rampages and has to be put down. And of course, it also leads itself to what we're talking about today with AI, with robotics, and all of the movies that have recently come out about robots also taking over the world. I just wanted to share with you, a lot of people know the legend, and you will hear it many times when we're in Prague, but not many people know where the legend actually comes from in the writings of Rabbi Low. So I found, and I didn't know actually, everyone says, oh, Rabbi Low created this golem, but nobody really knows where it came from. So I tried to do some research, and I looked up his writings, and I found this passage. So I'm going to invite someone to read it for us. Would someone like to read the passage from us from Rabbi Lowe's writings? Anybody who's a good reader? Jill, thank you.
For all things have letters, but the letters on their own are golem-like and have no animation without the vowel points. However, commensurate with the people's yearning and longing, the letters become animated through the vowel points, which are the aspect of soul received as a result of the yearning.
So this is Kabbalah, this is mysticism, this is not science, this is not logical. He's basically saying that Hebrew letters have the power to create life. And if you put the letters correctly in the right sequence with their vowels, you are able to animate what is inanimate, that is clay. Carry on.
In other words, if one yearns for something good, a holy soul is created from the kisufin, and the vowel points become points of the kesef. Then the letters which were golem-like become animated and become vessels with which to receive good. The same is true of the reverse, God forbid. If one yearns for evil, souls, which are the aspect of vowel points, are created from the yearning. Then the letters become animated and become vessels with which to receive evil, God forbid.
So again, not unlike what we're facing with AI today. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Is it good to create these animated replications of human life that have human thinking, human consciousness, awareness of life and death, of good and evil? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And he in this passage from the 1600s, he's already beginning to think about how dangerous this could be for all of us. I hope we'll be able to study a little bit more about Rabbi Lowe when we're in Prague together. This is a picture of the golem. You will find these all over the streets of Prague. You can buy these little clay models. They'll sell them to you for as many Czech crowns as they can get from you. Oh, do remember that in the Czech Republic, they don't use the euro, they use their own currency. So you will need Czech crowns if you want to spend money there, although credit cards, of course, are used. So that's the picture of the golem as envisaged by current people. And of course, we will be visiting the Golem Bakery. We will have to buy some golem biscuits. And this is all part of the culture of the Jewish legends of Prague. This is the coat of arms of the Jewish community of Prague. You will notice the Star of David, and in the middle of the Star of David, you will see a hat. This is a Swedish hat, and the reason why the Jewish community of Prague uses this as their coat of arms is because in the 1600s, 1648. The city came under attack from the Swedes. The Swedish army attacked the Czech lands, and the Jews participated in defense of the city, and they were rewarded by the emperor with this coat of arms, which was a Swedish hat encircled by a Star of David. And so from 1648, the Jewish community have used this symbol to describe their community, and they're proud of having defended the city on the behalf of all the people of Prague. So look out for this when you are going past any Jewish building or a flag or a piece of paper, headed note paper. You'll see this Swedish hat in the middle. Not many people know why the Swedish hat is there, and I wonder if the Jewish community in Prague know about why it's there either. We will ask them when we get there. Okay, modern times. So moving on from the medieval and the early modern period, as we've said, Jews were becoming emancipated. They were leaving the ghetto, finding homes on the west bank of the Vltava River, having lived only in the Jewish quarter on the east bank. as we said, the ghetto was preserved because it was a historical site, and everyone regarded it as important enough to keep. And Jews began to diversify into all kinds of industry and professions, making a real contribution to the country and the city. Moving ahead a lot, by 1930, there were 35,000 Jews, but 50% now were living outside of Prague. So we have a 50% of the community living in Prague and 50% living all over Moravia and Bohemia. That means that there were lots and lots of rural synagogues and communities. And each of those rural synagogues, there were hundreds of them, were quite small. If you think of something like New Hampshire, with all of those little Jewish communities dotted all over the place, and I'm always amazed when I find another one that's like 10 minutes down the road from Manchester or from Port or somewhere else. And that's what in the rural communities outside Prague. And Jews became very much part of the rural communities, and those rural communities were very much accepted by people in Moravia and Bohemia. Um, Not so much in Slovakia, which is, as we saw, on the eastern side. That really was influenced more by the Hungarian and the Russian experience, and therefore Jews were less involved in the countryside in Slovakia. Um, for most of life of when the Czech Republic was all three regions, Jews were mainly in the west and less so in the east. And they didn't have much to do with each other. Um, they actually spoke different languages. So in the east, there was more of a Hungarian feel to language and culture, and in the west, more of a Czech or a German feel. As you know, in Europe in 1848, there was a huge revolution across the whole of Europe, a revolution against autocracy, against the autocracy of the empires that were ruling the Prussian Empire, the Hungarian Empire, the Austrian Empire, the Russian Empire. Huge revolution, and that created a great deal of emigration from these lands, particularly in Central Europe, to the United States. And that's where we get the beginning of German and Czech communities in the Midwest, Cincinnati, Cleveland, all over Ohio, Pittsburgh. These are the communities that are built up from the 1848 revolution in Europe. And there are some famous people who leave the Czech lands and go there, and we'll come to them in a minute. There is beginning to be a real problem for the Jewish community about which cultural side to choose. There is the choice between the German side and the Czech side. The Czech side is indigenous to the area and to the peoples, and therefore Jews who identify with the Czech language and the Czech culture, they begin to be very much part of the parliament, the local representatives, the mayors. They become part of the running of the city. The German side is an influence that's coming from the west of the country and is gradually over time becoming more and more profound and pronounced, which means to say that much like other lands in this area, the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia, Western Poland, there's an influence of German culture. That, of course, is going to be of tremendous influence when we come to the end of the 30s and the beginning of the Nazi period. We are seeing, as I said earlier, more emancipation and more intermarriage, which is also going to be very important in the Nazi period, because at least 30% of the Jewish community is intermarried. And for a while, the Nazis will look upon the Jews in an intermarried relationship as exempt from the Jewish racial laws. So those people are protected for quite a while, not for the whole time, but certainly until 1943, 1944. You are safe if you are intermarried in 1941, 1942. The other kind of movement in this period is towards what we call cultural Zionism. You will know that Herzl had started a movement in the late 1800s of political Zionism. Prague was the center for cultural Zionism. Cultural Zionism was founded by a man called Ahad Ha'am. That was his Hebrew name. He was also known as Asher Ginsburg. Ahad Ha'am believed that Jews needed to be emancipated. They needed to find a way to have their own place in the world. They needed to have a understanding of what it meant to be Jewish, as one was French or German or English or Czech. Jewishness was an important identity. We needed to find a way to express that identity. And Ahad Ha'am believed the best way to do that was through developing a Jewish culture connected to a Jewish land. And although he was not as strongly a believer in Palestine as being the homeland for the Jews, he believed the Jews should have a homeland, and the Jews should find a place where that homeland could express Jewish values and Jewish culture. Cultural Zionism was a very big part of Zionism in the early 1900s. It was overtaken by the events of the Second World War. Had the Second World War not and the Shoah not taken place, I think cultural Zionism would have probably taken over the Zionist movement, and it would have been more about trying to find Jewish centers of autonomy, say, having places in Europe which were autonomously run by Jews and Jewish values, rather than looking for a state where all Jews could live in the Middle East. So that's just a quirk of history, but the Czech experience really lends itself to cultural Zionism. So we have some fantastic celebrities who emerge in the modern period. Franz Kafka, the writer, of course, many of you will know his writings, a surrealist and someone whose writings, a bit like Rabbi Judah Low, are coming out of a Jewish experience, but are very mystical and sometimes difficult to understand. They're very dreamlike, and they are both affected by his Jewish upbringing, but also by his upbringing as a Central European. Max Brod, the writer, Gustav Mahler, musician, of course, famous. Albert Einstein worked in Prague, and of course, for our own knowledge, Madeleine Albright, the former Secretary of State, who did not know she was Jewish when she was growing up, found out when she was Secretary of State that she had Jewish ancestry, and has explored and examined that, written a book about it, which I will recommend. Wonderful book. So all of these famous people were part of this experience. Now, I said that there were some people who left Prague in 1846 as part of that revolution that was taking place. One of them was Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise. I hope everybody knows who he is. He was the founder of the Reform movement in America. He comes from Bohemia. He's a Bohemian rabbi. A young man comes to Cincinnati, founds the Union of American Reform Congregations, then the Central Conference of American Rabbis, then the Hebrew Union College, which of course are the three main institutions of the Reform movement, and creates what we all know today to be the strength and the power of the Reform movement in America. He wasn't a Reform Jew in Czechoslovakia, in the Czech lands. He was a reforming Jew, meaning that although Judaism, as we've said, was losing its power, particularly among young people who were intermarrying, there was a an agreement amongst the rabbis that they would have to reform Judaism in order to bring Jews back to the synagogue. But Reformed Judaism didn't take root in Central Europe, in Eastern Europe. So we don't really have early Reform Judaism in Vienna or in Hungary or in Prague. Reform Judaism really flowers in Germany, in France, in Alsace, in England, and then in America. Because Reform Judaism can't really grow unless you have a democratic republic. And the Eastern cities and empires were not democratic. So unless you have a democracy, Reform Judaism, which of course is about freedom of choice and of being part of your country as a citizen, but also part of your religion as a faith, you can't have that unless you have a free and open society. So that's not the case in Bohemia and Moravia. So he comes to America as what we might call a reforming Jew, but really picks up the ideas of Reform Judaism when he gets to America. And he doesn't start off with everything we know as Reform Judaism. He starts off working in a congregation where there is separate seating, where there is women upstairs, where there are long services that have not been changed, everything in Hebrew. He is the one who starts beginning to say, no, we must have, of course, he was talking in German. We must have German in our services. We must bring men and women together. We must shorten the service. He did all those things. Tragically, and this is a famous story, which you can read, he did so quite aggressively. And there is one incident on Yom Kippur when the president of his synagogue is so angry with him that he punches him on the nose in front of the ark. And that's when Isaac Mayer Wise leaves and goes to establish his own synagogue, writes his own prayer book, and which, of course, as we know, becomes the Union prayer book that we use today, much revised. Who else? Franz Kafka, we've talked about a wonderful writer, a surrealist. We try and own Franz Kafka as a Jew. As I say, we think of him as both coming from a Jewish and a Czech background, so much so that in the Reform prayer book in England, the one I grew up with for the High Holy Days, we have a passage of his. This is a much loved passage in the prayer book. I have no idea what it's talking about. But people love this passage, and every year on Yom Kippur, people read it out aloud in synagogue, and they seem to love it. So, would someone else like to read it for us? Norma May, thank you.
I gave orders for my horse to be brought around from the stable. The servant did not understand me. I myself went to the stable, saddled my horse, and mounted. In the distance, I heard a bugle call. I asked him what this meant. He knew nothing and had heard nothing. At the gate, he stopped me, asking, "Where are you riding to, master?" "I don't know," I said, "only away from here." Away from here. Always away from here. Only by doing so can I reach my destination. "And so you know your destination?" he asked. "Yes," I answered. "Didn't I say so? Away from here. That is my destination." "You have no provisions with you?" he said. "I need none," I said. "The journey is so long that I must die of hunger if I don't get anything on the way. No provisions can save me, for it is, fortunately, a truly immense journey."
I don't know. Is it a dream? Is it a fantasy? Is it about Yom Kippur? About the journey of Yom Kippur? Is it about life? Is it something about life? I don't know. Is it the story of Jonah going away from here? It's got so many meanings. I'll let you think about that.
Mm-hmm.
We're not putting that in our prayer book. Sadly, I need to now come to the final part of our history. The Nazi Protectorate, you will all know, March 15th, 1939, Hitler marched into the Czech lands as what he called a protectorate. He was protecting German culture from what he called the Slav culture, that is the Czech culture. And sadly and tragically, there were people who wanted the German culture to reign supreme in these lands, but by and large, it was looked upon, of course, with great dismay. And you will, of course, know that Britain and France let Czech be overrun, did not respond, and beginning of the Second World War. So the person who took over Prague at the beginning was Heydrich. Heydrich was a general under Hitler, the head of the SS, and he was the quote-unquote protector of Prague. And quite quickly in 1941, he was assassinated in Prague by Prague, actually members of the Czech army who were parachuted into Czechoslovakia from Britain. The person who was in charge of the Jewish solution, the final solution in Prague, was Adolf Eichmann. And of course, you can't get any worse in terms of evil than Heydrich and Eichmann. And what they did at the very beginning was they completely deceived the Jewish community. They basically said to the Jewish community, we're going to move you to a resettlement area called Terezin. It's a fortress on the border with Germany. We're going to move the Jewish community there out of Prague for your protection. And you will be resettled there, and you will be safe there. And from 1941, they started to take over this fortress, which had people living in it. There were houses, and there was a German garrison, a Czech garrison there. They moved everybody out, and they moved the Jews in. The promise was that if you help us do this, they said to the leaders of the Jewish community, if you help us do this and make selections and help us with transport and get everybody ready to go, we will let you stay there. Now, that was a deception, because as soon as those Jews arrived in Terezin, or Theresienstadt, the Theresienstadt was the name given to the concentration camp part of the fortress. As soon as they arrived, transportation started to go to Auschwitz. So there were people who were being transported from Prague and the countryside into Terezin, and then immediately were being transported out of Terezin to Auschwitz. But those transports were kept secret from people in Prague. So people were not aware that basically they were going to their deaths. And this was a transit camp that was eventually going to send them off to Auschwitz and to death. This had also been a strategy in Holland with, if you know, the camp Westerbork was also a transit camp. There were many of these across Europe. Terezin becomes famous later on because the Nazis need to show to the world that they are looking after their Jews by the time they get to 1944. And they decide to make Theresienstadt into a model camp. Of course, that is a pure facade. And although Theresienstadt is not a concentration camp in the sense it's not a death camp, doesn't have gas ovens or crematoria, at least not until 1944, when the Nazis started to build them there. 30,000 Jews die in Terezin because of plague and malnutrition, hunger, starvation, and all kinds of diseases. So it is a horrible place. It is a place that Jews are deceived in going to. The only thing that's positive about it is that it's self-governed. It's a place where Jews can govern themselves for a period of time, and they do so with a Jewish leadership, Jewish council, and that Jewish council is allowed to make decisions on behalf of the Jews who are living there. There are very controversial discussions about the leadership, whether the leadership should have agreed to that strategy of looking after Jews. The people who were leading felt that they have no choice. It was that or put the Gestapo in charge. And what we know is that 75,000 Jews from all over Europe crowded into this overcrowding in this small fortress in Theresienstadt, and over 87,000 Jews were deported from Theresienstadt to the east, all of whom lost their lives in either Sobibor or Auschwitz. So terrible numbers and terrible experience. The silver lining, as I said, was that because Jews were able to organize life in the Theresienstadt themselves, they could organize life with religious services. So there was a synagogue. They could organize cultural life. There were lectures. There were concerts. There were ballets. There were operas. There were art classes. The flower of Czech Jewry was there, meaning that the head of the Prague Philharmonic Orchestra, the head of the theatre, the Prague Theatre, the head of the university was there, which meant that the intelligentsia in Theresienstadt could provide a real experience for people who live there. It gave Jews hope. We have many, many stories of Jews in Theresienstadt who really survived on very little to eat, very bad health, dysentery, malaria, but they were able to survive because they went to a lecture by Rabbi Leo Beck, Rabbi Regina Jonas, Max Brod, all kinds of famous people who you would never meet in the street if you were an ordinary Jewish person. And so that gave them hope. Meanwhile, in Prague, and this is a story that I've told before, so I won't go into detail, but in Prague, a very clever man, Joseph Pollack, who was involved with the Jewish Museum, decided that he would make a proposal to the Nazis that he would collect Jewish objects and keep them in Prague, he was thinking, well, when the Jews come back, we'll return them. But the Nazis, of course, knew that nobody was coming back. But they agreed to this, and Joseph Pollack, on behalf of the Jewish Museum, collected religious objects from 150 Jewish communities in Moravia and Bohemia. That included the 1,500 Torah scrolls. We've talked about that before. The thousands of prayer books, religious items, menorahs, all kinds of objects for religious use, like for circumcision, for Jewish weddings, chuppahs, and all kinds of textiles and furniture, chairs up from the bima, from the synagogues, textiles, coverings in front of the ark, bridal canopies, all kinds of things. The Prague Jewish Museum today has the largest collection of Judaica in the world, more than in Jerusalem or anywhere in the world, because of that collection, which has remained in Prague, except for the Torah scrolls, which went to London. So it's a what's called a precious legacy. That was the name of the exhibition that came around the United States, I believe in the 1980s, 1990s. I wasn't here then, but the Precious Legacy exhibition apparently pulled in the largest number of Jews to a Jewish exhibition in museums all over the States at that time. It was a traveling exhibition. We're going to see some of that, and we're also going to see the archives that document what happened to that items and how they got there and what happened to them during the Nazi time and then during the communist time afterwards. A picture of the Torah scrolls, the 1500 Torah scrolls that were in London and then were distributed around the world. And as you know, many of those Czech memorial Holocaust scrolls are in Boston. And there you go to many of our synagogues in Boston, Reim, KI, Mishkan Tefillah, Temple Israel. They've all got a Czech memorial scroll from this collection. This is Theresienstadt. As I said, it was originally a fortress. You can see the fortified outskirts, which was protecting it originally as an army garrison. Inside the buildings, which had Czech people living in it, but those people were moved out, and the Jews were moved in. It became a small city of 30 to 40,000 people, but it wasn't, of course, built for that number of people. And the accommodation was more like this. People lived on bunk beds, 10 to a room. And the living was probably very similar to that which was in the other concentration camps. But as I said, became a model camp later on. I have a video which I'm not going to show now because it's about 7 to 8 minutes, but it's about life in the ghetto. And then when the Red Cross came in to view the ghetto and what it was like for the inmates of the camp to be selected to be presented to the Red Cross, and how they repainted a lot of the bunks, not all of them, to show what it was like, and so the Nazis could put a show on and demonstrate how they were treating the Jews well. We're going to be hearing that story and a lot more when we go there. We're having a tour from one of the directors of the current museum at Theresienstadt. I spoke earlier about the Pinkas synagogue built in the Middle Ages. There was after the war, there was a commitment by the Prague Jewish community to name and record every Jewish person who was killed by the Nazis. And these names that you see here are painted on the wall of the inside of the Pinkas synagogue. So Krana, Ella, born on the 7th of March 1891, died on the 16th of October 1941. Kant Victor, born on the 25th of November 1880, died on the 26th of October 1942. So every single name of a person who was deported from Prague is listed on the walls of the synagogue. This is a close-up of the wall, and this is the synagogue walls, the interior, with all of the names on the walls. Has anyone been to the Pinkas synagogue? Ralph has. And Marty and Judy and Gert. It's a very moving site, I'm sure you would agree. It actually has been water damaged over the years, tragically. Water has seeped through the walls. I'm not entirely sure at the moment whether we'll be able to go in because it's being renovated and closed off for a while. But we'll talk about it and certainly pass by. Again, as I said, the synagogues are not usable, but they are part of the Jewish Museum. Just a little story about the Czech Republic after the war. Does anyone know who this is?
Ben-Gurion.
Yes. Do you know who the guy with the hat and the shades is? Okay, that's Ezra Weizmann. Ezra Weizmann was the head of the Israeli Air Force, later became the president of the State of Israel. So this is Ben-Gurion in 1948 with the Israeli Air Force commanders in the Czech Republic. The Czech Republic was the only country that would provide Israel in 1948, or the pre-Israel airplanes to fly and training for pilots. And as we all know, it wasn't without those airplanes. They never would have won the War of Independence in 1948. The Arab countries didn't have airplanes, except for perhaps Jordan had a very small air force with British officers. But the Israelis, again, like today, are using technology to overwhelm their enemies. And Ben-Gurion was able to do a deal with the Czech Republic. The Czech Republic, which was communist at the time, needed American dollars. So American dollars were funneled from New York to the Czech Republic to keep it buoyant. And then the aeroplanes were delivered to Israel. And Esa Weizmann was one of the first pilots to be trained by the Czech army and was able, therefore, to protect the new state of Israel when the Arab armies invaded in 1948. So on a happier note, ending on a good note, Rabbi David Mazza is going to be our rabbinic host at Eitz Chaim Synagogue, the Reform Synagogue in Prague. This is David. He's a native-born Czech, but was trained in America. We're going to meet him. We will have a nice time with him. He will lead us in Shabbat services, and we will have time with him and his congregation. And this is the congregation, Eitz Chaim. They are obviously a small congregation. As you can see, quite a lot of young people, and a Reform congregation member of the World Union for Progressive Judaism. And what I'm hoping also that we'll be able to do is David was able to do something that no one else has ever been able to do, which was ask the Jewish Museum to borrow one of the medieval synagogues for the High Holy Days. And he was able to get permission to use the Spanish synagogue. This is one of the Prague synagogues in the Jewish quarter that was preserved. And this beautiful, beautiful synagogue was used by the Prague Reform community last High Holy Days. I'm hoping we'll be able to get in and see it. I've been to services there, and it's just a beautiful experience, particularly if you're a cantor or a musician, because the sound quality is just fabulous, and such a beautiful synagogue that we will certainly want to see that. Not everybody gets to go in there. It's not open regularly to the public. I spoke somewhere, and I don't remember now, about the Charles Bridge. Where was that? Somewhere yesterday, the day before, Friday night. I can't remember. Anyway, this is the sculpture on the Charles Bridge, which, as you can see, has Hebrew writing. It says Kadosh, Kadosh, Adonai Tsevaot, which is from our prayer book, but of course has Jesus hanging on the cross, and the letters INRI, which means Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, and the word Kadosh on top. It's a controversial memorial and statue on the Charles Bridge. We will visit it and talk about its meaning. Okay, recommended readings. Everyone will get a copy of this PowerPoint and recording, so you can look at these and other materials. I know some other people are recommending other books, but the book by Madeleine Albright is great, Prague Winter. A book called Prague Pictures is very good. Under a Cruel Star, if you're interested in the Shoah experience, a book about the Golem you have to read, and of course a book about Kafka. There is also I just found this in the library, and your local library will have many of these books. And you, of course, can borrow them. If I take off my screen, I'll just put it in the front. There we you can't see that. I will add it to the list. It's called Prague in Black and Gold. It's scenes from the life of a European city, and it has good references about the Jewish community. So I'll add that to the list. And I think other people had choices. Norman, I think you had a book, didn't you? You wanted to recommend?
It's called The Last Palace, and it's by Norman, I forget, the guy who was the US ambassador to Czech Republic, I believe, under Obama. And the Last Palace was built by this Jewish family in the early 1900s, and it's apparently, it's now the American embassy. And when this author, Norman Eisen, was the ambassador, he stayed in it, and then he wrote this book about that family and about subsequent occupants of this very grand house, which I believe is near the castle, Prague Castle. So it's a very easy to read book, and you get a real flavor for what Prague was like.
Will you put it in the chat with the title and the author?
Oh, sure.
Then we'll all have it.
Here. Just tell me what it is.
If you have other books, please add them to the chat, or films, movies that we should watch before we go. Anything to do with Prague, the Czech Republic, Central Europe would be great to share our expertise. And then finally, our trip. We're going to have 5 days in Prague. We have a host. Jonathan Woodcliffe is an old friend of mine from London, but he lives in Prague, and he's organized our trip for us, which is going to be wonderful because we're going to have somebody in the know around all the time. He's a wonderful gentleman, and I hope you all enjoy meeting with him. And we are going to, over the 5 days, and you will be receiving a schedule and a timed schedule with everything on it, and where we're going to meet, and when we need to take a bus, and when we need to walk, and all the free time that you'll have, all of that you will receive. This is not that. This is just kind of the highlights of what we're going to be doing. We are going to do a walking tour of Prague and its highlights. Most of our walks are going to be 1.5 hours to 2 hours. So you need good shoes. We're walking, on city streets. Nothing is too rugged, nothing is too hard. We will stop for drinks and stop for benches and sitting and talking, but we will be walking. Nothing is so far away. It'll be very much like we had in Oxford, and it'll be nothing that I think that will be too arduous. We are definitely, of course, going to be looking at the Prague Jewish Museum. Jonathan has arranged for us to meet with the director, which is very unusual and very special. She will be showing us the archives and some of the things that people don't get to see normally. There's no way we're going to be able to see the whole of the Jewish Museum because it's the largest in the world, which means to say that your free time will be your choice, and you can either do more of the Jewish Museum or other things, of course. We're going to have a walking tour of the Jewish ghetto, looking at the synagogues and the cemetery. We're going to get something from the Golem Bakery, and we're going to definitely have some experience with understanding the picture of what I've been talking about. We do have a day trip to Theresienstadt. We're having a guided tour of the camp and the museum. I was hoping we could do that a little later on in the schedule, but because Sukkot is on the first day that we arrive, it looks like we're going to have to do Theresienstadt on the second day of our tour, because Theresienstadt is open on Sukkot, but the Jewish Museum and the Jewish Quarter are not open on Sukkot. So we will, unfortunately, I wouldn't choose to do this, but we'll kind of start backwards. We'll start with the experience of modern of the Shoah and of the ghetto and of the Teresian start experience, and then work backwards to the early modern and the medieval period. We will, on our tour to Teresian, we will take in a regional synagogue and see something of what life was like outside Prague. We will have Shabbat services at the Reformed Synagogue, and we will hear from Rabbi Mazda. We are being invited to Jonathan's home to have lunch in his sukkah on Shabbat. He has a rooftop sukkah, apparently, never been there, but we're going to enjoy that. We are going to have a dinner in a traditional Prague brewery. We're going to order pilsners all around and enjoy that experience. And of course, there will be dinners provided, not every night, and I will indicate which dinners are going to be provided and which dinners are free, where you can go either as a small group or on your own to your own favorite place. The couple of famous restaurants we will be going to, there's a Jewish restaurant, the King Solomon restaurant, and a famous restaurant called it's gone out of my head. It's called Turquoise. We'll be going to the Turquoise restaurant. And this is where I wanted to ask everyone a question. There is an option on the Saturday night, that's the night before we leave, to go to see the opera Nabucco by Verdi. Nabucco is, of course, it has a Jewish theme. It's all about the Israelites in the Bible. If you would like to see Nabucco, could you raise your hand? Everybody. Okay, I'm going to get tickets for everybody, and we're going to have an early dinner, and then we're going to see Nabucco together at the Royal Opera House. It's going to be a wonderful evening. However, I want to warn you, the next morning we have to get to the train station very early, about 8 o'clock, for our train to Vienna. So nobody's allowed to stay out late. There is a curfew. No drinks with the ballerinas and the opera singers. I'm going to stop sharing. I think that's my last slide. Oh, no, there we go. Last slide. As I say, all this will be recorded and given to you. 8:20, we did pretty well. I'm going to ask if there are any questions or comments or contributions, anything you want to add. And I have another question I want to ask in a minute. Jill.
I know this is a little preemptive, but if you can think about any reading recommendations for Vienna as well. So during the summer, we can do some reading, because I know as we get to September, as we'll all be a little crazy pants.
I have them already, and I can definitely send them out.
Great. Awesome.
Jennifer.
Also, if you could give a date as far in advance as possible for the Vienna lecture that you're planning to give, that would help.
September 3rd. It's already done.
Oh, wonderful. I didn't need to ask.
September 3rd, 7 o'clock.
Just to say a word about Vienna, I'm going to give a similar overview of Vienna in September. The trip pretty much is organized. As I say, we've just got to do some final details. So I will send you a program, possibly for that evening, so that we have the program at that time, and then we can look over it together and make any tweaks if we need to. So it'll be both about Vienna and about the program itself. Vienna is only 3 days. We arrive from the train station Sunday afternoon. We have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. We leave. We fly from Vienna on Wednesday. We are going to have a cultural experience in Vienna, which I'm not going to reveal yet. And I've been helped by Jennifer and by Marty in some of those evening experiences. During the day, we're having a guide who's going to be with us for the whole of the time when we're doing our walking tours. She is, I've spoken to her, she's a wonderful guide. She is going to take us both on kind of the general view of Vienna, but also the Jewish view of Vienna as well. So we're going to get those two walking tours in, and some other things that we're going to be doing together. There's going to be some free time as well in Vienna. As you can see, we've got a lot to do, but I do want to give free time. So it's always important that you get some time to do what you want to do as well.
Thank you so much. So exciting.
Ditto.
Yeah, fabulous.
When we were in Oxford, we found that everybody did a lot of things together. I would suggest we're quite a big group. We'll be 24 altogether. Sometimes that'll be too many to, decide something like, oh, let's all go out for lunch somewhere. And 24 people is a lot of people to go to a cafe. So I would suggest that I'm going to set up a WhatsApp group. If you know WhatsApp, we used it before. It's quite clever. It allows you to send out a message to everybody which says, I'm looking for someone to go to lunch with, or I'm going to the Jewish Museum again. Would someone like to come with me? So you can do that kind of thing and send messages back and forth to each other. You can also direct your messages. So let's say you have 3 favorite friends you want to go to dinner with, and you're not inviting everybody, or you want to go to the Kafka Museum, or you want to go to something completely different. Then you can also identify people in your WhatsApp group and have a subgroup and do things together. So we'll be setting up a WhatsApp group where you can communicate. We can all communicate together, and when I want to communicate with you, I'll do it that way. Often it's something like, we're meeting in the lobby of the hotel at 8:30. Please be there. In Vienna, we'll all have to buy a 3-day bus pass because we'll be using public transport. I'm hoping that on the first day when I get there, I can buy them all for us, and then we'll all have a ticket. It depends on whether I can buy that many tickets or whether we all need to buy our own. But we'll work all that out when we get to the point of needing to do that. Jennifer.
Based on what you've described today, I'm curious, why did your friend, Mr. Woodliff, I forgot his first name, choose to leave England and move to Prague?
Oh yeah, you will talk. He will tell you his whole story. He would love to tell it. I will not to tell it for him. But you'll enjoy hearing from him. Yeah, and he's been there a long time now. Yeah, he loves Prague. Remember what I said about money? We need crowns to spend if you are. You can get them in the airport, but credit cards, of course, most people use credit cards. When we're in Vienna, we'll need euros for anything that we're spending in cash. But again, it's capital city. You can get them anywhere. Bob?
Is it very easy to find people who speak English in Prague?
Yes, very, very easy. Yeah. Yeah, no problem at all. BK?
You guys are arriving by train from Vienna on the 5th, is that right?
I think it's the 6th. Let me check.
Oh, the 6th, okay.
No, we are leaving Boston on the 6th. We're
Oh,
arriving on the 7th, which is Tuesday. So we're leaving Monday night and we're arriving Tuesday morning.
so you get to Vienna on Tuesday morning and then you take the
Oh,
train to
no, I
Prague.
was talking about Prague, sorry.
So I thought you said you were taking the train from Vienna to Prague. Did I misunderstand that?
We are, that's right. We are flying directly from Boston to Vienna
Right.
and then taking the train from Vienna, Boston to Prague, and then taking the train, that's right, from Prague to Vienna. No, that's not right.
Yeah.
Flying between them.
So you're not flying into Prague and out of Vienna? You're
Yes.
flying so you originally said earlier that you guys were going to fly into Vienna, take the train to Prague on that first day, and then store luggage. So that was incorrect.
That's incorrect. Yeah.
Okay.
I think originally you had set up an agenda, an itinerary going to Vienna first, and then we changed that.
We
Yeah.
we
Okay.
switched them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I will provide the full schedule by the time we meet again.
Okay.
Okay, 8:30. Any other questions or comments? Any concerns? Feel free to let me know anything along the way. Perhaps a question you might ask is, how do we feel about being a Jewishly identified group walking around a European city? I have to tell you that there are Jewish groups going to Prague and Vienna all the time. In fact, Hebrew College just came back from an organized group. Absolutely no problems whatsoever. Rabbi, forgotten his name now. The rabbi who led it wears a kippah all the time, and he was wearing it as he was leading his group in Prague last couple of weeks ago. No problem whatsoever. Most people have no interest in us whatsoever, so I don't think anyone needs any anxiety on that score.
I elect to hold on to some anxiety because of what's going on in the Middle East.
Yeah, and we'll see what it's like in October. Absolutely. But we're there as tourists. They are keen, I mean, everyone is keen in Europe to welcome tourists. It's part of Prague's main income now, and Vienna. So I have no anxieties, and I hope I'll be able to hold them for you without any need at all to worry about it.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you all this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Wonderful.
See y'all.
See you again.
Thank you. Very nice. Very nice.
Thank you.
Look forward to it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.